For 34 years on the throne, Catherine the Great expanded Russia's empire to the Black Sea and transformed it into a true European power. Yet what secured her legend was not only armies and treaties, it was art. Her most enduring legacy is the Hermitage, a museum born from passion, intellect, and strategy, crafted by an empress who understood that culture could be as powerful as war. This is not just the story of a monarch. It is the journey of a foreign bride who became Empress of Russia, an outsider who faced suspicion, intrigue, and betrayal, but who turned art into politics and a museum into a declaration of civilization. The year is 1729. In the small Prussian town of Stettin, a girl named Sophia Frederica Auguste is born. No one imagines this princess from a minor German principality will one day rule the largest empire on earth. Her childhood is modest, yet marked by sharp intelligence and an insatiable hunger for books. She devours philosophy, languages, and history. Even before fate intervenes, she is preparing herself for something greater. That fate arrives when Sophia is chosen to marry Peter, heir to the Russian throne. She is just 14 when she travels to a land so vast, so foreign, that it feels like another world. She learns Russian with relentless discipline, converts to the Orthodox faith, and takes a new name, Catherine. But her new life is anything but secure. At court, she is treated with suspicion as a foreigner. Her marriage to Peter is fraught with unhappiness and humiliation. Yet Catherine does not surrender. In the quiet of her chambers, she immerses herself in Voltaire, Montesquieu, and Diderot. From their words, she draws conviction an empire cannot survive on bayonets alone. It must be enlightened, educated, and cultured. These nights of study will become the foundation of her reign. Then comes the turning point. In 1762, Peter III becomes Tsar. His rule is weak, erratic, disconnected from the needs of his people. Within 6 months, Catherine moves decisively. She orchestrates a nearly bloodless coup. Peter is deposed. Catherine ascends the throne. Europe is stunned. A German-born woman has seized the crown of Russia. From that day forward, she must prove she is not a usurper, but the rightful architect of Russia's destiny. While most rulers cement power through wars, Catherine sees another path. She understands that true greatness requires culture. She begins corresponding with Europe's greatest minds. Voltaire hails her as a philosopher on the throne. Diderot dreams of her as a sovereign who might realize the Enlightenment's ideals. These relationships strengthen her legitimacy abroad, but they also shape her vision of Russia's future. The seed of that vision takes root in 1764. Catherine acquires 225 paintings from a Berlin merchant. She houses them in a small chamber of the Winter Palace and calls it the Hermitage, a retreat, a place of solitude. At first it is modest, but in that modesty lies the origin of one of the world's greatest museums. From that chamber the Hermitage grows relentlessly. Catherine purchases entire collections from across Europe. Dutch masters Rembrandt, Rubens, Van Dyck. Italian treasures Raphael, Titian, Giorgione, ancient Greek and Roman sculptures, tens of thousands of books. Each acquisition is not indulgence but strategy. Each work is a building block in the architecture of an enlightened empire. Within 2 decades, her collection grows to more than 4,000 paintings, 38,000 books, and thousands of sculptures and jewels. The Hermitage is no longer a retreat. It is a palace of art, dazzling envoys and nobles alike. Those who enter its halls leave not only impressed, but transformed. The message is undeniable. Russia is no longer a distant, barbaric frontier. Russia stands among the enlightened powers of Europe. Critics, then and now, have said Catherine's collecting was vanity and extravagance of a vain monarch. But the truth is far sharper. Catherine wielded art as a weapon. If armies expanded borders, art expanded respect. Where swords demanded obedience, paintings commanded admiration. The Hermitage was her soft power, a force that compelled Europe to acknowledge Russia's place at the table of civilization. Her collecting was also personal. In these works she found solace and affirmation. She once wrote that she needed to create a paradise within 4 walls. The Hermitage was that paradise, a space where she could retreat, reflect, and remind herself of her vision. Yet she was always aware that this private paradise was also a public declaration. The ambassadors who walked its halls saw more than paintings. They saw legitimacy, intellect, and power. By the time Catherine died in 1796, she had left behind not only a stronger empire, but a cultural beacon. The Hermitage had already become one of Europe's greatest collections. Today it houses over 3 million works. From Leonardo da Vinci to Matisse, from Raphael to Picasso. But at its core remains the vision of a single woman who dared to believe art could be as powerful as war. From Catherine's life, 3 lessons remain. First, soft power outlasts hard power. Battles may redraw maps, but culture redraws memory. Second, culture is never just beauty. It is strategy, it is legitimacy, it is persuasion. And third, one woman can rewrite history not only with armies and crowns, but with books, ideas, and canvases. So when you walk through the Hermitage today, amid its gilded halls and endless galleries, remember that it began with a single woman's conviction. A foreign bride who arrived in Russia unwanted, who seized a throne against all odds, and who built an empire not only of land but of culture. If you believe true power lies not just in borders and battles but in art and memory, then Catherine the Great's story still speaks to you. Her legacy shines not only in the grandeur of St. Petersburg, but in the enduring truth that beauty can rule as firmly as steel. New York, January 5, 1943. A sign on West 57th Street reads, "Exhibition by 31 women. It is not a slogan, it is a line in the sand." Inside, 31 voices step into the light at once. The woman who opens that door is Peggy Guggenheim. Here is what you will see. How a gap becomes a stage. How design turns into persuasion, and how a single program can move the center of gravity. Wind back 1 year, art of this century opens in 1942, not a white cube a stage. Frederick Kiesler suspends works so they seem to float. Light pulls the eye. The route through the room is choreographed. The space makes an argument before a single word is spoken. Now the decision. Peggy looks at the exhibition lists and sees an absence so obvious it feels invisible. Women are there in studios and letters, but not on the wall. So she writes a sentence the city has not read before, exhibition by 31 women. She asks Marcel Duchamp to advise the format and selections. Then she commits the room. The title does not hedge. It does not ask permission. It simply names who is speaking and then lets the work speak. Open the doors and watch the mixture. Abstraction beside surrealism. Europe beside America. Names you know beside names you should have known sooner. Frida Kahlo and Leonora Carrington. Leonore Feeney and Merritt Oppenheim. Dorothea Tanning and Louise Nevelson. Hedda Stern. Kay Sage. Vieira da Silva. The point is not a single style. The point is range. Look at how the room teaches you to look. Pieces are paired to create friction. Scale shifts from intimate to emphatic. A corner becomes a hinge between ideas. What you meet is not a parade of frames, but a conversation you have to walk through. Design is doing the quiet work of persuasion. The city reacts. Some critics squint for labels. Is this a stunt? Is it a manifesto? Peggy declines the trap. She centers the work and lets the audience do the naming. Attendance rises. The list of artists circulates. A curtain that had been half drawn for decades moves a little more open. And it does not end at one night. 2 years later, she returns with The Women, 1945, extending the argument. Meanwhile, the same gallery launches Jackson Pollock into his first solo show and commissions Mural. This is the method: build a runway, not a headline. Make it a program, not an exception. Why does this matter now? Because habits outlive evidence. Institutions repeat what they have already seen. Peggy's move breaks a loop without breaking the audience. She uses the tools of a patron money space schedule and aims them at a gap everyone pretends not to see. She does not wait for the market to invent demand. She manufactures the conditions in which demand can hear itself. Think of what the title does to your expectations. Exhibition by 31 women. You enter prepared for a single note. You leave with a chord. The show refuses the idea of the woman artist as a genre. It replaces the cliché with a map. What lingers after the posters come down is a procedure anyone can use. Find the empty lane. Design the encounter, not just the wall. Repeat until a novelty becomes a habit. 3 takeaways clean. 1, occupy the gap. If the lane does not exist, stripe it and drive. 2, design is persuasion. Sightlines, height, pacing the room, writes the subtext. 3, make it a program. One night argues. A sequence convinces. If you were standing on West 57th in January 1943, would you hang that sign? Would you take the risk of clarity, A or B, occupy the gap, or wait for consensus? And if you ran your own version today, which 3 names would you put on the wall first? Venice, 1948. One nation doesn't show up. The Greek pavilion stands empty. A private collector is invited to fill it. She hangs 136 works in 3 days, and modern art walks back into Europe like it owns the stage. This isn't a museum press release. This is Peggy Guggenheim. What you'll take away, how she turned a vacancy into a victory, how design became persuasion, and why place, not just taste, can change the read of art. Before the doors open, rewind a few years, Paris 39 to 40. Peggy sets herself a rule: buy a picture a day. Cubists, surrealists, the unfashionable, the urgent. It isn't just collecting. It's salvage and a plan. The plan says, when the room is ready, be first through the door. The room is Venice. After the war, the Biennale returns. Pavilions expect safe choices. Then Rodolfo Pallochini makes a call. Use the empty Greek pavilion. Show the present tense. Peggy says yes. She brings the new with no apology: Brancusi and Kandinsky beside Miro and Klee. Early abstraction and surrealism. And a young American language Europe has barely heard pronounce itself. It's not nationalism. It's proof of life. For the build, she partners with Carlo Scarpa. Not a decorator, an architect of how you encounter a picture. Scarpa sketches routes, sightlines, heights. A Mondrian anchors a wall. Other works climb around it. Some pieces hang in corners, heresy then common sense now. Frames float. The gallery breathes. You don't walk past a row of rectangles. You climb a conversation, and the city watches. Critics file dispatches. Crowds queue. Someone calls it like popping a bottle of champagne after years of calling this art-degenerate Europe, suddenly sees it alive again. The scandal isn't the bodies or the colors. The scandal is clarity. Does a private eye belong in a national pavilion in 48? That's the question. Peggy's answer is blunt. If the nation won't introduce the future, I will. She is not there to flatter flags. She is there to switch on a century. Now the trick no one notices at first place. The Greek pavilion gives height and distance. Windows thresholds a cadence of rooms. Scarpa uses it all. The same painting shifts character when the architecture shifts the approach. Design doesn't just decorate. It argues. Zoom in on a corner. A Brancusi sits with a Miro. You step left. Lines align. You step right, a color leaps. Scarpa is conducting. Peggy is programming. The audience is learning to look again. And outside the Giardini, Peggy is already thinking about a permanent home. In 1949, she buys the Palazzo Venier dei Leoni on the Grand Canal. 2 years later, she opens her doors free, 3 afternoons a week. A private address becomes a public habit. Venice doesn't just host art. Venice frames it. Myths pop up as they do. Anyone with money could have done that, except they didn't. Because money acquires. A patron orchestrates, a buyer fills walls, a patron builds context. Peggy's genius isn't just what she owns, it's where and how she makes you meet it. Another myth. It was all shock value, but shock ends at the door. What remains is sequence. The order you meet works in the scale. They command the dialogue that makes a Pollock read next to a Klee, or a Mondrian steady a room, while a Miro sets it spinning. This is curation as grammar. What changed after 48? Europe stopped treating the new like a rumor. Young artists saw a map and a standard. The Biennale remembered its job not to mirror consensus, but to introduce what consensus will later pretend it always loved. 3 takeaways clean. 1. Occupy the empty pavilion. Vacancies are invitations. If the stage is open, step on it. 2. Design is persuasion. Sightlines, height-pacing architecture, writes the subtext. 3. Place is soft power. Choose the room and you choose the reading. If you had the keys to an empty national pavilion, would you install a private collection and call it the present? A. Take the room. B. Wait for permission. Tell me A or B and which 3 works you'd hang first. What do you do when the biggest museum in your city says no New York 1929? Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney offers more than 500 works of modern American art as a gift to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The offer is declined. A door closes and a mandate opens. Here is what we'll trace tonight: why American artists needed a home of their own, how Gertrude built that home from the ground up, and why the Whitney's mission still sounds like a present tense. First, the person behind the name. Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney wasn't just an heiress, she was a working sculptor and an insistent patron. In 1914, she set up the Whitney Studio in Greenwich Village, giving exhibition space and oxygen to living American artists who couldn't get a hearing in the academies. The goal wasn't decoration. It was circulation works moving into public view while their makers were alive. By 1929, her holdings had grown past 500 works. She tried the obvious route, donate them with a mandate to the Met. The answer, no, didn't end the project. It defined it. If an existing palace wouldn't make room for living American art, she would build a house where that art was the rule, not the exception. So she founded a museum. The Whitney Museum of American Art was established in 1930 and opened in 1931 on West 8th Street. On day 1, its core was roughly 600 works from Gertrude's collection, enough to state a point without saying a word. The point was simple: the art of this country now. From the start, the Whitney wasn't just a repository, it was a program. It focused on living American artists, buying work in the year it was made, exhibiting it before consensus could sand the edges off. In 1932, the museum launched a recurring survey of the newest work, the show that would become the Whitney Biennial. The first director, Juliana Force, ran it with the urgency of someone building a bridge while people were already crossing. Why did Gertrude have to found the Whitney? Because American artists were undervalued by the institutions built for other traditions, and because waiting for acceptance would have meant losing a generation. The refusal from the Met wasn't a snub to sulk over. It was evidence that a distinct institution was necessary, one with a sharpened mandate and a door that swung open toward the studio, not the salon. Let's clear 2 myths. Myth 1: the Whitney began as a Vanderbilt vanity. The record shows the opposite, a sculptor-patron building platforms, Whitney Studio in 1914, then a museum in 1930, so that living American artists could be seen and sustained. Myth 2, the Whitney was anti-European. It wasn't a protest. It was a focus. The museum's charge was to develop American art on its own terms, which also meant placing it in conversation with the world, just not overshadowed by it. What did this change? It changed timing. Support arrived while artists were alive. It changed geography. Greenwich Village, not just Fifth Avenue, became a center of gravity. It changed grammar. A museum could be written in the present tense and still hold history. Listen to the cadence of those early years: a studio in 1914, a declined gift in 1929, a museum founded in 1930, doors opening in 1931, a biennial by 1932. That's not drift, that's design. 3 takeaways clean. 1, occupy the gap. When a legacy institution won't hold the work, found the space that will. 2, support the living. Buy in the year of making. Show before consensus. That policy isn't fashion, it's infrastructure. 3, make it recurring. A museum becomes a verb. When its surveys repeat, the biennial is a beat, not a one-off. If you stood on West 8th Street in 1931, you would have seen a modest doorway and a very large idea. American art deserves its own institution, and it will have one. In our next episode, we'll walk that idea forward from the Village to the Breuer years and to the Whitney's move downtown, how architecture kept rewriting the museum's voice without losing its mandate. Imagine walking into the icon room at Hillwood. Gold shimmers in the light enamel, seems to breathe. On their pedestals, 2 imperial Fabergé eggs gleam like punctuation marks in a long story about time, power, and will. How did these treasures, once the pride of the Russian court, end up in a Washington mansion? And how did one woman born into American industry transform herself into the guardian of an exiled empire's art? Her name was Marjorie Merriweather Post. To many, she was simply the serial heiress daughter of C.W. Post, who built Postum into the foundation of General Foods. She was born in 1887, raised in wealth and destined to be one of the richest women of her time. But Marjorie's legacy is not only measured in dollars or company shares. Her true argument was visual. She chose to let her life be written in porcelain gold and enamel in rooms filled with objects that told the story of vanished courts and displaced empires. The turning point came in the late 1932. Her third husband, Joseph E. Davis, was appointed United States ambassador to the Soviet Union. That meant Marjorie was living in Moscow during one of history's strangest transactions. The Soviet government, desperate for foreign currency, began selling off the treasures of the Romanovs. Palaces were emptied. Icons, silver, enamels, jewelry, all stripped from churches, aristocratic mansions and imperial storehouses were quietly placed on the market. For most foreigners, these objects were curiosities. For Marjorie, they were destiny. She had already trained her eye on French decorative arts, collecting Sèvres porcelain and 18th-century treasures. When she saw the Russian objects, she recognized their quality instantly. This was not random shopping, it was a strategy. She had access through her diplomatic position. She had timing buying at the very moment masterpieces were set in motion. And she had taste, the ability to see how Russian craftsmanship echoed and rivaled the French. Piece by piece, she brought them home. Among them were 2 Fabergé imperial Easter eggs, the 12 monograms egg of 1896 made for Empress Maria Feodorovna, and the Catherine the Great egg of 1914 celebrating Russia's most powerful empress. These were not trinkets. They were relics of sovereignty, symbols of faith and power, forced into exile. And now they lived in Marjorie's hands. But the collection did not stop at jewellery. It grew into nearly 90 Fabergé works alongside icons, silver services, court gifts, and hundreds of objects that once defined the language of Imperial Russia. She was not the only collector, but she was the one who would make a museum of it. In 1955, she purchased Hillwood Estate in Washington, D.C. To the outside eye, it was just another grand mansion. To Marjorie, it was a stage. She curated it as both her residence and her blueprint for a future museum. Every room had a role. The French porcelain room demonstrated her training in proportion and finish. The icon room rephrased that training in Russian gold enamel liturgical splendor, all set as if the Orthodox court had been reassembled in Washington. Hillwood was not decoration. It was an argument. Marjorie knew her role was temporary. She believed herself a custodian, not an owner. Her plan was to give Hillwood to the Smithsonian to ensure it would live on as a museum. When that arrangement failed, her foundation stepped in. In 1977, 2 decades after she purchased the estate, Hillwood opened to the public. A private home became a civic institution. Her vision became real. So what do these objects mean beyond their beauty? They tell us about the mechanics of power, a government selling its past, dealers translating value across borders, collectors anchoring displaced culture in new settings. It is soft power in reverse. Not a nation sending art abroad, but a citizen creating a stage so exiled culture could still be seen. The lesson is clear. Timing is leverage. When history releases its treasures, someone must preserve them before they vanish. A house can be a museum. When designed with intention, rooms can argue, not just decorate, and most importantly, collections reach maturity only when the front door opens. A treasure hoarded is a story silenced. A treasure shared becomes a story retold. Stand again in the icon room. Look at the Fabergé eggs glowing under glass. They are not just art objects. They are markers of diplomacy, commerce, and taste. They chart a journey from the palaces of St. Petersburg through the storerooms of the Soviet state, across the Atlantic, and into a Washington mansion where the public can still see them today. Marjorie Merriweather Post did not simply buy, she built. She built a house, a museum, and above all, a promise that the treasures of an empire would not disappear into private vaults. That beauty, even when torn from its homeland, could still speak. And that one woman's vision could turn exile into permanence. Pause, soft close. In the shimmer of enamel and gold, in the silence of Hillwood's rooms, her promise still stands.